So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jenny Phan. Dr. Phan is a research postdoctoral fellow in the Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders at Children's National Hospital. She holds a PhD in Human Development and Family Studies from Iowa State University. Dr. Phan is a self-advocate mother and researcher and serves as a public member on the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee. And her interdisciplinary research focuses on the interplay between stress response systems, pubertal development, and mental health, with a particular interest in studying the adolescent experience of neurodiverse youth. So Jenny's going to start by giving a short overview, and then we will head into the panel. We'll save time for questions at the end, so please feel free to direct chat those to me, and I will compile them. And right now, I will let Dr. Phan take it away.
Hi, thank you, Kara, for that introduction. I'm going to attempt to share my slides. All right, can everyone see my presenting slides?
Looks great.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you for that introduction. I'm very honored to be moderating today's panel discussion. But to start us off, let's begin with some brief definitions. So there are different types of participatory research. Participatory research, sometimes called PAR for short, involves community members as partners, not as subjects in research studies. Community-based participatory research, also called CBPR for short, is an approach that equitably engages members of the community, organizational representatives, and researchers from the beginning of the research project all the way to the dissemination process. Now, there are other types of research partnerships, including academic community partnerships, which involve members of academia and can be across different disciplines. There is also patient-led research where patients are involved in research initiatives that are important to them. An example is the organization Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI for short. All right. So participatory research, or PAR, is rooted in the principle that research should involve those who are the focus of the research. It views all participants as active contributors rather than passive subjects. Participatory research in autism communities would focus on engaging autistic people, their families, and community organizations in the research process. Participatory research can be applied in multiple settings and is not confined solely to community contexts. It could, for instance, involve employees in organizational research or students in educational research. Participatory research emphasizes democratizing knowledge, recognizing diverse forms of expertise, and ensuring participants have a voice in decision-making processes throughout the research. The goal is often empowerment and transformation, allowing participants to understand and take action on the issues they face. Participatory research in autism would aim at practical outcomes that directly benefit the community. For instance, research might focus on developing informational toolkits that can be easily implemented in a school or home setting. Now, community-based participatory research, which I'll call CBPR for short, is a subtype of participatory research specifically tailored to community settings. It emphasizes co-learning and reciprocal transfer of expertise between researchers and community members. It's rooted in the understanding and betterment of specific community issues. Researchers and community partners collaborate from the outset to define the research problem in question, design the study and develop methods, gather data and interpret results, and implement solutions. This co-production of knowledge enhances the validity and applicability of the research. CBPR stresses mutual respect and shared decision-making. It recognizes the community as a unit of identity and emphasizes the local relevance of public health issues. Autism communities bring about ethical advantages such as enhanced informed consent procedures and greater attention to the community's values and interests. CBPR often results in interventions or strategies that are tailored to the unique characteristics and needs of a specific community. The goal is sustainable community change, improved health outcomes, and the elimination of health disparities. While CBPR offers many advantages, it also presents challenges such as power imbalances between researchers and community members and the complexities of managing diverse interests. So I thought I'd do a very quick exercise for today's discussion. I did a quick search in PubMed. So for anyone here who might not know, PubMed is a popular free resource for searching biomedical and life sciences literature. And in PubMed, I use the keywords participatory research or community-based participatory research or community-led research in titles and abstracts. And the results yielded 6,181 publications, with the earliest paper in PubMed on the topic published in 1981. My approach in this literature search was not at all rigorous or methodologically sound. It was simply a quick search of the literature database for today's discussion. So I scrolled through the list of over 6,000 publications to skim over topics that involved participatory research. And I noticed that earlier publications were more consistent in using the term community-based participatory research or participatory research. But in more recent years, there has been different terms used, such as participatory-led research, community-based partnership, community-based participatory research, and participatory action research. When I did a similar search using the terms co-production research or co-production partnerships, the results yielded 16 publications, with the earliest in 2014. I didn't find any publications that included the terms co-production research and autism. So I went back to participatory research and CBPR and autism, and also included the terms autistic and ASD. And the latest publication I found was published in the journal Autism Research of this year, titled the INSAR Community Collaborator Request, using community academic partnerships to enhance outcomes of participatory autism research. One of our panel discussion panelist members is a co-author, Dina, who I will introduce later. As I kept casually scrolling, there were maybe only a handful of other papers that were about autism and participatory research, and most of them were in recent years, 2021 to the present. So this is a ripe area of research. Someone has to do a systematic or scoping review on this. Maybe after today, someone will. So just a brief history of participatory research. It emerged in the mid-20th century as a response to hierarchical traditional research models. It aimed to flatten the power dynamics by involving community members in the research process. The concept of participatory research is deeply connected to social justice movements, which are organized efforts advocating for equal rights and opportunities for all, regardless of their social or economic background. In the same vein, civil rights initiatives aim to ensure that citizens are free from discrimination based on attributes like race, gender, or disability. In this context, participatory research served as a tool to empower marginalized communities by giving them a voice in studies that directly affect them. Over the years, participatory research has evolved to become a democratic tool for inclusive research practices. It shifts the focus back to the community, allowing for a more equitable distribution of power and knowledge. The community's insights are not just consulted, but are integral to the research process. The principles of social justice that underlie participatory research make it especially relevant in the context of autism. The goal is not just to understand, but also to validate the experiences of people on the autism spectrum. This provides a platform for autistic people and their families to actively contribute to research that directly impacts our lives. Here are some examples of participatory research and CBPR. Each of these logos contain links to the organization's websites. I think the slides will be shared later. I won't go into details of these organizations to reserve time for our panel discussion. Without further ado, I am very honored to introduce our panelists for today, beginning with Sandy Magana. Sandy holds the professorship in Autism and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities in the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Austin. Professor Magana is the Executive Director of the Texas Center for Disability Studies and Director of the Autism Consortium of Texas Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental and Other Related Disabilities. Professor Magana identifies as a Latina professor and researcher. Her research has focused on identifying experiences and ethnic disparities of Latinx families of autistic children and developing interventions to address their needs. Next, we have Nelsinia Ramos, who is the Associate Director of Wisconsin Family Assistance Center for Education, Training, and Support, and co-director of the Wisconsin Parent Training and Information Center. Over 20 years ago, Nelsinia faced the challenge of raising her young daughter with autism while learning English and navigating the special education system. This experience has fueled her commitment to helping other families who are raising children with disabilities, especially those who share her Latino heritage. Nelsinia is a TA specialist supporting parents in 16 states. Next, we have Laura Anthony. Laura is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences, the director of research in the Division of Child and Adolescent Mental Health at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, as well as a licensed psychologist at Children's Hospital of Colorado. She is a co-developer of Unstuck and On Target, a suite of executive functioning supports and lessons for schools. Unstuck has been developed from the start with participatory processes. She has been working with Donnie Denome and other autistic researchers on co-developing a self-assessment autistic traits as part of the team on one of the Autism Centers of Excellence networks. Next, we have Donnie T.C. Denome. Donnie is a multiply disabled autistic self-advocate, AAC user, writer, and graphic designer. Donnie works as the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network's inclusive publications and research coordinator, where they create, edit, and curate many of ASAN's easy read and plain language resources. Donnie holds a Master of Public Health degree from Claremont Graduate University. Donnie is interested in disability culture and community building, comprehensive, competent mental health services for people with disabilities, and bridging connections between the labor rights and disability rights movements. Next, we have Becca Laura Hector. Becca is an openly autistic professional on a mission to close the disability gap in leadership by working with companies to attract and retain disabled talent via her DEIB initiatives. Becca was diagnosed autistic as an adult and has since become a dedicated autism and neurodiversity advocate, researcher, consultant, speaker, and author. In addition to her work in DEIB, she is focused on autistic quality of life research. She is an animal lover with a special affinity for cats, who spends most of her free time with her many animals, her husband, Antonio, and her emotional support animal, Sir Walter Underfoot. Then now we have Dina Gassner. Dina is a passionate advocate for social change who was diagnosed with autism in 1999. Dina is a PhD candidate in social work at Adelphi University, a national board member for the Institute for Exceptional Care, and an appointed member of the ARP Gender, Sexuality, and Healthcare Node with UCLA. She is also an appointed member of the Federal Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee. In 1999, Dina was honored with the Kathy Pratt Professional of the Year Award from the Autism Society of America, and she was recently entered into the Union College Healthcare Hall of Fame at her undergraduate alma mater. So before we dive into discussion, some panel guidelines might help with the conversations. These guidelines were used with permission from the New York University Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Strategic Innovation. So first, we begin with listening respectfully without interrupting. Next, to listen actively with an ear to understanding others' views. And then to constructively critique ideas, not individuals. Allow everyone to speak, share space, use wait, which stands for why am I or am I not talking? Next, avoid assumptions about any member of the community and generalizations about social groups. Assume good intent, but acknowledge impact. If someone makes a comment you find offensive, let them know. If you make a comment you realize was insensitive, acknowledge it. This is colloquially referred to as the oops, ouch rule. I'm going to introduce our panelists in pairs. First, we have Sandy and Nelsenia. Then we have Laura and Donnie, and then Becca and Dina. Welcome. So the first question we have for our panelists for today, I'd just like to ask if each pair, please keep your responses under 2 minutes just to start us off. So the questions are, when did your partnership start? Why did it start? What has its purpose been? And who else is part of it?
Nelsenia, do you want to start off?
Sure. Hi, thanks for inviting us. So the partnership that we have with Wendy and her, Sandy and her research started several years ago. I believe we said 2011, but you may mention that, when it's your turn. But the most important is that even though it has been many years before we get to that point, it progressively grew into that. So it was throughout the years. Do we want me to address the 4 questions right away? That's what we're doing, right?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
So why did it start is because obviously there was a need for more research to identify not only the supports, but the gaps, obviously, that Latino families or in the community were experiencing in terms of the autism. So this is good. It was good for the researchers as well as my agency. We're a parent center, so I think that it was a win-win situation in that respect. So the good part about who else was part of it too is that certainly there was a pool of stakeholders representation that we certainly carefully chose, not only from people from the community that it was part of the research or they will benefit from this research, but also from those professionals who were actually working in those areas supporting the families.
And just to build up on what Nelsenia has to say, we developed a relationship, I think, probably starting in 2006, because I was doing research with the Latino population, and Nelsenia was not only a participant of the research, but also helped to recruit families with a support group that she ran, Spanish-speaking support group. And I started to do a study on health sort of health promotion among caregivers using promotoras or community health workers, parent leaders. And Nelsenia said, we should do this for autism. Because these families really need a lot more information about autism. So that's really how the idea of our partnership began, is Nelsinia suggesting that we do something. We looked out for grant proposals, and we were just lucky that at University of Wisconsin-Madison, they had a translational research center and a proposal, that we could do. And we got that funding, and we started our partnership on this particular project.
Thank you so much for introducing your partnership to this panel today. Can we hear from Laura and Donnie next?
So I'll start first and then turn it over to Donnie. Our partnership started originally with our co-production Autistic Partners in 2016, and it started as a second wave of an Autism Center of Excellence that was specifically looking at gender issues. And it started with our co-investigators, Julia Bascom, who was the president of ASAN, and Sharon Davenport, the president of AWN, with that special gender focus to provide some social validity to both our brain imaging findings. I say our, they really weren't mine. I had nothing to do with it, but social validity to brain imaging findings from the ACE, and some social validity also to the autism diagnostic procedures, specifically the ADOS Module 4 with adults and teens. Then COVID came, and we pivoted to a true CBPR project where we wanted to create, and Julia and Sharon are first authors on the original version of this measure, the self-assessment of autistic traits that are autistic centered. And that really became an incredibly exciting process and purpose. We had a large Delphi panel that was part of that. And then now we are in a new wave of our ACE funding, and that's when Donnie joined, and I'll turn it over to them.
The purpose of the ACE partnership that I am part of is to create and revise the self-assessment of autistic traits, or SAT, that can be used as a reliable and validated measure in diagnostic processes, just like the ADOS or other diagnostic measures. So far, we have created an initial set of questions, gotten feedback on those questions from our advisory boards, and then significantly revised the questions based on advisory board feedback. We are now in the process of conducting cognitive interviews, mostly with autistic teenagers, to make sure the questions are cognitively accessible to a range of people.
Thank you, Donnie and Laura, for your introduction to your partnership. Becca and Dina, would you like to introduce your partnership?
Sure. Dina, do you want to, or would you like me to?
You can go ahead.
Sure. Well, Dina and I have kind of a different partnership, I guess, than everybody else here. She and I have partnered on a bunch of different projects together, but I think the one that will benefit everyone that's here the most is the work that we do with ASDD, or autistic adults and other stakeholders together. And that is one in which Dina and I both sit on the community council for. That is a PCORI funded project. We've got 2 PCORI funded studies right now running on. And we've also done work as a group to put together things involving payment and other type items in terms of how we engage with our community as researchers, and what processes and systems we use to get there. So that's really what we've been focusing on, and really looking to our community to guide research and what it is that our community wants to see looked into. So that's the work that we do together.
I think one of the other big advantages to our work with ASDD, I think, Becky, you would agree, is that We were very cognizant from the very beginning of wanting to document our processes and procedures so that they could be shared with other groups. So if you look at the PCORI website now, you'll see some of those projects that worked at, paying people reasonable rates and, how to organize community participatory research. The other thing is I work with multiple CBPR projects, but the one thing I love about ASDD is of all the projects I work on, I won't name them so they don't look bad, but it's the only one that asked us what we wanted before they engaged in the research. Sadly, many times we're asked to consult on projects after the research trajectory has been determined by non-disabled people. And so I think that they miss out on a lot of input from us that might be valuable if we had been brought in not in a consultative role, but as co-researchers from the very beginning. And ASDD has always done that. The other thing about our ASDD team is the inordinate amount of executive function support that we receive to maximize our capacity to participate. If I'm busy trying to track the number of hours I'm working, or I'm busy spending time trying to figure out what comes next in a research project, it's really very challenging for me then to also have enough cognitive space to be productive on the project itself. And so ASDD has really been a leader, I think, in taking a lot of those burdens off of our backs so that we can be more effective for them.
Thank you very much, Dina and Becca, for introducing the work that you both do and the many projects that you do work together on. So let's continue our conversation with the first question to our panelists. And as you respond, if you don't mind, clicking on the reactions hand raise button, and I will call on you to respond, just to make sure that we keep pace with the time and not run too over, because we want to give our audience a chance to ask questions at the end. So the first question to everyone here is, what tips do you have to lay the foundation for a strong partnership? Sandy, and then Nelsinia.
Yeah, I wanted to say one of the key things that I learned through the process of trial and error is you really have to have that shared vision, and that's something that we had in this partnership. Is we had the same goal of what we wanted to do. Nelsinia representing the organization facets, and me as a researcher, we had a shared vision. And then the other thing, we might get to this a little bit later, but just making sure that resources are shared. And and I'll turn it over to Nelsinia.
I think that it will be interesting for people to know, or my suggestion is understanding that partnerships are key, definitely, but it takes time to get them, and especially because of the trust. But no matter what, it's trust. It's worth doing. So it takes time to get that. It can take years, but that's important, being in connection. And I think that something that was key too is that requesting that input, as Sandy mentioned, because when you're piloting or doing the trial, I think there could things that could be different in listening to that. So I think it's something very important to remember, in having a key person that deciding or defining who's going to be the key person that will be keeping that communication going.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? To add to this conversation, I have another question for the panelists on tips. What should people who are new to co-production or community-based participatory research be aware of? Becca?
I think folks need to be aware that the autistic community has our own culture and our own versions of what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior. and those kind of things. And so before you come and hang out with us and try and work with us, it really behooves everyone involved if you do a little research on your own to learn more about our culture and sort of what is going on for us in our world and in our community, and what the big, conversations are. Think of it as visiting a foreign country, and you wouldn't do that unless you did a little research on what the good foods are for you to eat and all of those things. And you wouldn't just arrive and expect people to take care of you, right? So we really appreciate it when you guys do your legwork and your homework. And if that means reaching out to us to ask for additional education, we are happy to help.
Thank you, Becca. Dina?
Thanks. I would say also in the projects that I've been working on with Becca through ASSET, we don't presume that everybody has that knowledge of our culture. And in the 3 or 4 projects we worked on, we always started first with creating a training for the people who would be implementing the study. And in the process of co-creating the training materials, we made sure everybody on the core team was on the same page, but it also gave us an opportunity to share that information with, say, other graduate students who would actually be doing interviews or actually implementing a therapeutic approach, to make sure that they were culturally competent. I prefer culturally humble in recognizing our autism culture and not even inadvertently saying or doing something that could make the person who's participating, the autistic person who's participating, be less engaged or interested in rushing through the intervention model because they don't feel comfortable. We try to create as safe a space as possible, and that begins by our core team being on the same page.
Thank you, Dina. And then next question, I'd like to, seeing something in chat. Yes, Donnie, did you want to unmute and share your thoughts on tips for the community?
For people new to community-based research, you are going to have disagreements, both between autistic co-researchers and between autistic co-researchers and non-autistic co-researchers. Striking a balance within study questions and research materials that is accessible to autistic people while still conveying the message you want and being IRB compliant is difficult. There is also the issue that no one autistic person can speak for the entire community, and even having several autistic co-researchers does not ensure that you will have perfect representation. You will need to be aware of whose perspectives you are centering and whose you are not including, and how that will affect your research. You need to consider things like co-occurring disabilities, a range of support needs, racial, ethnic, and linguistic backgrounds, gender and sexuality, and how all these things affect how someone interacts with the world and perceives their autistic traits. There are typical autistic traits and presentations, yes, but there is no typical experience of being autistic. You need to account for diversity of identity and experience in your work, even if you don't have co-researchers who can speak to a particular identity or experience.
Thank you, Donnie, for that perspective, and very, very important to consider, especially for researchers who are new to this paradigm. The next question I think is also pretty important for our panelists to address. What supports can be put in place to ensure the meaningful engagement of non-speaking co-producers? Donnie?
Lots of time to answer, having questions in advance, and making sure there are ways to answer questions via text meetings, and that answers or comments put in the text chat are read aloud and taken seriously. I have seen admin meetings with other groups where despite having the text chat open. Nobody ever reads the text chat aloud or reminds others to read it. Or maybe someone does read it, but they only respond to what the speaking people have said in it. If you want to make your meetings accessible to non-speaking people, you need to give us methods for answering questions and take what we have to say seriously. The meeting cannot be dominated by the people who can literally speak the loudest and quickest. You also need to think of conflicting access needs and how you respond to them. If your audio captions can't understand an AAC device well enough to provide accurate captions, for instance, you need to get a human captioner or figure out some other way for people to contribute and be heard.
Thank you, Donnie, for that very, very important perspective. Nelsinia and then Dina.
Yes, I agree with what Danny said, and I think that also requesting definitely input, as he was mentioning about with the population, but not only not making the assumption. So how do we make sure that this is not only a representation of one family, but this is a person that had actually connections with the other families too. So they also, because during like if you are trying already something, well, let's say that making in this case, translations available, because when we have these meetings to gather some of the input, so that was one of the accommodations, making sure. So I was asked, for example, before the meeting, and a few other people, we checked to make sure that actually the questions were to the level that we were understanding and not too academic in a way, right? Because we're working with families to make it meaningful. And then eventually, as if you're trying your product or co-production, I think it was key that at a certain point, immediately you need to stop to adjust something, and that's part of the input in case that something didn't work exactly the way it was supposed to be. So it will be more meaningful to make that adjustment quickly and move on instead of being so strict. I understand there are rules for that, but I think that was meaningful. That was my input here.
Thank you, Nelsinia. And then Dina?
I would also say it's really important to leave room for growing. I'm on the IAC, and our very first IAC meeting with this new contingent, we had so many issues because many of the people who were non-speaking and many of the people who are speaking but prefer text were trying to write information in the chat. But any federal government activity requires, because of sunshine laws, that all shared information is publicly disclosed. And so it took our committee at least 2 meetings to figure out a strategy for that, right? So now what happens is people who prefer text over speech or people who require text over speech can send their comments directly into a specific chat destination. And then that person's entire job through the whole meeting is to bring those to the forefront and read them aloud. That way we're respecting the sunshine laws, but at the same time, we're also respecting various ways of communicating. But it took time, right? It took us a couple of stumblings to get there. So, I guess I would say, you're going to make mistakes in this process. You're going to make assumptions that you didn't even realize were subversively happening. And, we need to, be very accountable for the blunders we may make along the way, whether it's regarding methods of speech or race and cultural or ethnic differences. We're going to make mistakes because we all come from different places. But accountability, apologizing for what we didn't know, and then asking sincerely, how do we fix this? How do we do better going forward, is all part of the growing process when you're doing community engaged research.
I'm loving everyone's responses to these questions and also taking notes. I hope everyone listening is doing the same. But let's continue this conversation some more with everyone here. With your experience and in your opinion, what do you think are the most important benefits of partnership and co-creation processes?
I think this would be a good question for the not autistic people to start with, because I'd like to know what researchers find beneficial.
Okay, well, let's begin with Sandy. Sandy, I think you're muted.
There, sorry about that. I think first of all, we're producing more of the truth, you know, by having a co-partnership and co-leadership. So really having research that does not reflect the voices of people. I started out doing community organizing way back in the day, and it was always about, if we're talking about low-income people, they have to be part of the picture, right? If you're talking about low-wage workers, they have to be part of the picture. So it's very similar. I think you're not going to get the full story without the full knowledge and story, and just valuing that is super important.
Thank you, Sandy. Does anyone else have something they'd like to add? Nelsinia and then Laura.
So in terms of what Sandy said, I would like to add that probably the most beneficial of doing that, in short words, is the buy-in. Like, if you make me part of it, it's easier for me or my community to be part of it and to participate. That's it.
Thank you. And Laura?
I think the short answer is that over my career, if I weren't using co-production or CBPR, I just would be doing all of the wrong stuff. So I think the partnerships really save those of us who are non-autistic. They really save us from ourselves. And I think they also save us about 10 to 15 years in the research to implementation, typical 17-year timeline. And that's really valuable. I think, though, we should ask what it means to be a researcher. And if possible, I would like to pass it to Donnie, who has a great answer about that, with permission.
Donnie,
I think the partnership and co-creation forces us all to reckon with what doing research means and who can be a researcher. Because, especially in autism and disability research, there is often a bright line between researcher and community who the research is on or about. Autistic people, historically and currently, do not have the same access to the academy and to research as non-autistic people, and even when we have access, we often don't get to do the research we want. Autistic people have been asking researchers, universities, and other organizations, such as the Federal Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, for research on our priorities. But the focus too often remains on basic neurobiological cure and prevention research or behaviors intervention research. If we are to reckon with how to make research work for autistic people, we need to start by seeing autistic people as equals in research and using co-research and co-creation models.
Thank you so much, Donnie, and to you too, Laura. The next question is one that I'm very excited to ask the panelists about as someone new to CBPR research, and having an advisory board that I would like to elevate respect of all the co-decisions that are made in the research project. So I'm going to read out the first main question, and then I'll read out the sub-questions. So anyone want to tackle any one of these questions, please do so and raise your hand. So the first main question to you all is, how do you manage power imbalances and ensure equitable recognition within your partnership? And then the series of sub-questions include, how do you manage decision-making and differing priorities? The second, how do you sustain partnerships after funding or projects have ended? And then the third, what has compensation and pay typically looked like within your team? And then the fourth question, how do you handle authorship and recognition? And you may choose any one of those questions to respond. Sandy?
Yeah, one thing I could talk about is, so my partnerships have been with organizations and community-based organizations, you know, that serve the Latino families that have children with developmental disabilities or autism. And one of the things that's super important is to recognize that their time is valuable. You know, they have, you know, I do a lot of intervention research. So to expect a community organization to implement an intervention without compensating them for their time is just not realistic in any way. And so really it's important to make sure that in your grant proposal and budget that you're budgeting money for the organization. And what I typically have done is given organization, I mean, work together on the budget, but give them the budget to manage the for their part of the project. And then you know, people are compensating according to that organization's pay structure and everything. So so that's not talking about individual partnerships, but it's talking about an organizational partnership with an organization.
Thank you so much for that insight. Laura?
I would just like to mention about the pay, and that is because it is something that I really has been an issue with many other projects that I've seen. We have always paid our autistic partners or consultants or advisory board members the same that we would pay a physician consultant or advisory board member, which is currently $125 an hour. I have heard from many people that this isn't possible with this funding mechanism or that funding mechanism. And I would just like to say that I have used many, and all of them that you have probably tried, and I have used it with success. I have not been able to get it right currently with PCORI above $125 an hour, but still that is pretty good. And certain universities make it easier to pay in lump sums and sometimes upfront than other universities, which takes a tremendous burden off of everybody, honestly, that when you have a trusting relationship and we are all professionals and valued, there's no reason not to do that if there's any way that the university which I say university because it's often a university that gets that is prime for getting the money.
Thank you, Laura. Becca?
This is a topic that's really important to me. I'm somebody that really has fought really hard for us to get paid properly and to be compensated properly for our engagement in research. I am someone who said no thank you to all of the $25 Amazon cards that I've been offered because no thank you, right? I know you guys are getting your salaries and I know you guys are attached to a university and have tenure and whatnot, but I'm an independent consultant and I don't have those things. And if I'm being hired to give you my information or my expertise, I deserve to be paid accordingly. And I deserve to be paid in the kind of timing that like my electric company wants its bills paid in, right? And so that's a really big problem that we've got going on. Academics walks around and touts how much they want community involvement in research, but that's not true because they keep us out. They keep us out by making it hard for us to get paid. And Laura, I appreciate what you're saying about bulk payment, but sometimes for some of us, that bulk payment can be an issue too, right? Some of us need to be paid in pieces because of our Social Security and disability insurance, right? And things like that. So when you're engaging with our community, you have to remember that we bring a lot of value. Like, you guys are publish or perish, right? Well, you're not publishing with our information unless you treat us like human beings, right? And that's where it's coming down to. And what happens is many researchers succumb to the bubble of like the lab or the research world, right? And forget that they're talking about people, and that they're researching human beings, and that ultimately the data they're collecting will impact or not impact the lives of people out there, right? As a community, the autistic community, unfortunately, needs to rely on your data to get ourselves funding and supports and services. So we must partner with researchers in order to get our needs met, right? And that is a power dynamic, if I've ever heard one, right? And so we are already in a power dynamic the minute you start doing a study with people, right? There's power and privilege afoot, whether it's about payment, value of time, value of input, right? All of those things. And I also want to point out that a lot of people step into the trap, which it was mentioned earlier, about not wanting to have barriers, right? And put barriers in and want to create equity. And one of the things that academics does best is create a hierarchy. Do a really good job of doing that by making sure that everyone has letters after their name, right? And you have letters after your name, so you're inherently what? Better than me. You wear a white coat, so you're inherently better than me, more powerful than me, right? That's the impression that's given. So we talk a lot in ASDD about removing barriers like those, right? So the invitation came out for this event, and I couldn't help but notice that everybody had to have letters after their names who is on the panel. I'm somebody who doesn't have a PhD, and I don't want one. Frankly, I'd rather use my money for other things, right? And so I have no interest in having letters after my name. I could have them, but I don't want them. But somebody felt like it was important that letters be after people's names in the invitation, so they decided to put a BA after mine, right? And what does that do in a list of people? Creates a hierarchy immediately. It was your invitation. You said it in your invitation that there's a hierarchy, right? And so we have to do better than that. We have to either start saying what it is that you mean, which is that you don't really want community engagement and that we're a closed hierarchical group that you can't come into unless you've earned the privilege, or say, yes, we want the community involved and we're going to change our processes and procedures to make it so that people can be involved, right? So I also put a little link there because ASDD has managed to publish on this concept to give other research teams a way to understand compensation and engagement. And it talks specifically about paying people in there and why it's important. So please feel free to do that, to take a look at that with us.
Thank you so much, Becca, for that perspective. And what I'm hearing too from just like, I guess, a gathering of my thoughts of what you were saying is communication and the way we present ourselves needs to have some sensitivity to the community we're speaking to. And that includes how we present our names and how we introduce ourselves. Dina, I will get to you next, but I want to give Donnie a chance to share their thoughts. Is that okay?
I didn't prepare answers for this section, but I will say that teams need to be aware of the power dynamics involved in co-research. Everyone on the team should be a co-researcher. We should not make differences between professors, academics, clinicians, advocates, and other partners. Autistic co-researchers are not just glorified advisory board members or token names and identities to make your study look good. We are co-researchers, and we need to have a say in the actual research design, questions, and analysis. If you are only bringing on autistic people after you have gotten your grant and already formulated your study questions and gotten IRB approval, you're saying that autistic people's contributions do not matter before the approval. You are saying that it is more important to you to get funding and IRB approval with a non-inclusive study than do the work to design an inclusive one from the ground up.
Appreciate that, Donnie. Thank you. Dina?
Yeah, I just wanted to expand a little bit on what Becca said about Social Security. Many of us who would engage in co-research status I'm still on Social Security disability. And when I have to give ASAN credit. The last event I did with ASAN, they said, do you want a check or do you want an Amazon gift card? Right. And IRBs are so resistant to alternative ways of compensating people. But that is a game changer. You know, I bought some Christmas gifts. I was able to, you know, it really truly became recreational money and true compensation for me. Because if you pay me in cash and I have to execute a W-9, then that has to be reported to Social Security. And it could actually bump someone off their benefits. I had an experience, and I'm not picking on anybody, but they forgot to pay me. And then when they paid me thousands of dollars. And now I have to create a documentation of all of my earnings for the entire year to be able to demonstrate that this was 2 years worth of compensation, even though it all came in 3 months. And that's just so much more labor than I signed up to execute. So I just want people to know that when compensation is not, as Becca expressed, you're not given a choice, right? You're not given a choice in that it's either paid one way or it's paid another way, or you use this card versus this cash. What you're really doing is pushing people out because we just can't afford to again, use our cognitive energy to fight with those kinds of systems. The systems are broken, and it's up to IRBs to get up to speed on how to do community-gauged compensation. I do want to say too, and this is what I love, Beck and I don't agree on everything by any means, and that's why we're good friends. I have waited 65 years to put letters after my name. And it's not about me being more privileged than anybody else. It's about me getting my medallion that says, I went through the gauntlet. And it doesn't mean anybody who didn't isn't good. It just means like, I finally made it. So, I always defer to that positionality that Becca illustrated. But when you've waited as long as I have, you really, really want your letters, but I get it. And so again, being culturally competent, I would defer, right? And that's what we're really talking about here. Everybody comes in with privileges and identities and gifts and strengths. And sometimes we have to be willing to pull back and defer to a more prominent or a more marginalized voice, or somebody who comes from a different ethnic or spiritual background. We just have to be flexible that way.
Thank you so much for those perspectives. And I think this conversation is leading to, it's a really good segue to the next question, but to, Donnie, did you have something to add?
Yes. I was part of a program for AAC users to improve healthcare for people with speech disabilities. And they kept telling us that they would pay us via gift card if we needed it. And then told us at the last minute that they couldn't pay us by gift card and everyone had to get checks. And then they made the process to get paid incredibly inaccessible. And for what? $250.
Thank you for sharing all of these insights as co-producers in CBPR research. And I don't think this is a conversation I've heard in my training as a new CBPR researcher, and I think it warrants further discussion. Thank you. The next question to our panelists, before asking it, I just want to make sure everyone who's in this Zoom room knows that that our panel includes community partners and autists who are both co-producers, as you've heard already, and mainline researchers. So to our panelists, my question is, how can we do better reaching and including partners with more diverse identities and experiences? Dina?
I struggle to find that hand thing. Anyway, I want to say that in my case, I'm about to engage in my dissertation research, and in the communities that I've reached out to, what I did, and I learned this from, a person who runs a group that services people of color. She said, we don't engage in research with our community because we never get anything for our community back. So before I even approached the 3 recruitment sites, I had an offer for them. So what I do is, in my clinical work, is I help people get Social Security. I've figured out a way to bust the system. It doesn't matter how high your IQ is, whether you have education behind you, whether you've had cyclical employment. I can make a case for an autistic person to get disability, and it's a replicable system. So this time, when I went in and asked if they would be willing to aid in my recruitment, I said, in exchange for this, I will offer you a 3-hour workshop to help your community become skilled at navigating Social Security. So sometimes it's not just compensating someone or offering a charitable donation. The question you need to ask is, what do you have to offer them besides just the gratuity of being part of research, right? This was something very concrete that could change the lives of all of the constituents that are supported in that organization. And so I think about what can you trade. It's not a coercive process. It's a matter of that power imbalance and respect for the people that are giving their time and energy to help you out.
Yeah, and I've heard other people call it a transaction and what would benefit the community. Sandy?
Building on what Dina said, I agree with being able to offer things up front. But another aspect that Nelsonia had talked about earlier is the issue of building trust with the community. And this is super important, especially if you're any community, right? But we do research in minoritized racial ethnic communities, and it's super important to volunteer. Don't just go in there and ask for research participants right away. Become part of that community and actually build trust. And it takes time. It might take 6 months or a year to build trust with particular communities. But if you're intending to really work with that community over time, then it's definitely important that you get in there and actually participate in that community.
Becca? And then Donnie? Becca, you're muted. There you go.
I want to share that the right relationship dynamic, right, about this is an experience that I think is really important for researchers to understand. You must take off your researcher cap at some point and be a human, right, for 5 seconds during your process, right, and understand that if you're looking for diverse identities and diverse experiences, right, you have to get out of your own way. You have to humble yourself. You have to become curious, right, and go out there and learn about the different groups, right? I mean, we have what research used to be, and the purpose for research existing is not what research is anymore, right? It's now it's more of an academic game, and it's a game about who's going to get the funding, and if you get the funding, are you going to get the funding next time, and did you publish off your funding for last time? And we've lost this idea that research was because we were looking for answers to certain questions, right? And so when we stop asking the right questions, we're no longer doing good research, right? So what we have right now is a lot of research on autism that people took the easy route for, right? When you do genetic testing, for example, or anything on zebrafish, your data is going to be very black and white, right? It's going to be really easy to prove. It's going to be really easy for you to write a paper on, super easy for you to get funding on and live your life going down that road. Now, will a zebrafish ever solve a problem for autistic individuals out there? No, but those researchers have great careers. They've got lots of publication. They're working at a good university. They're checking all of their boxes, right? And I think that's something that I would love to see change from new researchers. I would love it if we went back to saying, are we asking the right questions? And that's where community engagement comes from, because we'll tell you if you are, right? And when we cut that off, that's it. Now we're just doing research for the game of it all, right? For the chessboard. And that's something that has to stop. Yeah.
Thank you, Becca. Donnie?
You have to start by looking beyond autistic people who are either already in academia or have college or graduate degrees. Community partners need to center people whose perspectives aren't already at the table. You need to include autistic people without college degrees, autistic people with intellectual disabilities, non-speaking autistic people who are not fluent AAC users, and autistic people with high support needs. When the only autistic people on your team are the ones who can more or less pass as non-autistic, and the ones who already have a foothold in academia, you are leaving a lot of people out. You need to make plans and accommodations for how you are going to include autistic people who are heavily marginalized within academic research, and that does not mean just using parents or family members as proxies. You need to actually value what self-advocates with significant support needs and intellectual disabilities and unreliable communication say as much as you do what those of us who can reliably communicate and don't have very significant support needs or intellectual disabilities say. You need to include self-advocates with significant support needs and intellectual disabilities and unreliable communication as co-researchers, not just advisory board members. Because academia is already very insular and tends to only offer positions to people who look like those already in the academy, or who can pass as a typical academic. You need to take significant steps to combat that and change you as a typical academic. That is the only way we are going to get equitable representation for all autistic people in research.
Thank you so much, Donnie. I'm going to call on Nelsenia next, but then after Nelsenia, we're going to turn it over to audience questions.
Okay. So I think that when I'm going back into the question before, because something that might be important to include in partners is their sustainability. And I think that relationship that I have with Sandy, for example, has been throughout the years. One of the things is because I always learned something. I was part of what she was doing from beginning to end, that communication. It was just not only like getting something done, but I was able to use some of that knowledge within my own community. So that was super attractive to me. That's something I'm learning from you, that I'm going to be able to use it and have a benefit of it. And it's super important too, because I think that I have led Sandy to other partnerships too, because she, like I didn't want to just do it myself, but it's because of the trust. So something that I was able to see, I had the chance to read many of her research when I was finishing school. And I noticed that my agency was always, like included, but not only as a agency itself, but as the parent movement. So that meant a lot to me, because it recognized the work that we're doing as a movement of parents. So be mindful of that, because I have been part of others that they never mentioned, like how they got this and didn't recognize the little effort, that the agencies do. Nobody will notice. So that's meaningful to me, and that's why I keep trusting what she does, and I I'm always willing to help on anything. The same for her when I need a little knowledge on something. So we keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nelsinia. So before I turn this over to Kara to read the audience questions to the panelists, I want to read one comment from a member who's in this meeting today. Ava Gerba said the type of gift cards can be problematic too for Social Security. It does matter sometimes to SSA what type of gift card is given. For example, a Visa gift card versus an Amazon gift card. Thank you, Ava, for that perspective. I've also heard advisors say this exact same thing. Okay, Kara, do you want to go ahead and take over now?
Sure. We have a few questions, but I also want to give the panel to some space for any remaining comments, but I can read out. So we have one comment that says, I wanted to express my gratitude for the Asset Engagement and Compensation Guide that Becca Lori Hector shared in the chat. This guide was an authoritative resource, excuse me, for the ACE Gender Network policy. Like Sandy, the ACE Gender Network also engages our autistic research partners through contracts with their associations like ASAN and AWN, but relied on the Asset Guide heavily for engagement with our advisory board. So that is one, and then I'll pop that in the chat as well so that we have access to that. The next question too is, how do you manage balancing the value of an individual's lived experience with their other areas of expertise too? And so in parentheses, the audience member said, this question is asked from the perspective of ensuring that we do not reduce a person to only their lived experience or otherwise tokenize that experience. And I will pop that into the chat for everybody as well. I can reread that again. It's a lot of words if you need.
I can say one of the great things I've enjoyed about being at Asset is, as somebody who's waited 64 years for a career because I was busy raising another autistic adult to his personal best, I undervalue myself. I hope that doesn't sound too pretentious, but I don't think it's unusual for us to have had repeated traumatic experiences that even within ourselves, we diminish our capacities sometimes. And while working at Asset, with every iteration of a new project, the people who are coordinating everything have moved me up in terms of responsibilities. They've recognized more than my lived experience. And, they pushed me, and Becca and I both have been heavily involved in designing and implementing training materials, things that I probably would not have voluntarily done initially, but they're helping to not only expand my skill set, but they're kind of mentoring me to push my skill set to new standards and new expectations so that I continue to develop new skills. And I think that that's one way that you can respect someone's lived experience, but you can also help them cultivate, if you will, expanded experiences that allow them to be of value to that group, but other groups and within their career at the same time.
Thank you so much for that, Dina. I want to read Donnie's comment in the chat really quickly before calling on you, Becca. Sorry. So there are more and more people with intellectual disabilities and significant support needs participating as co-researchers. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anyone's names. Micah Falka Feldman, Max Barrows, Tia Nellis, and Liz Weintraub are some of the ones who have done very significant work. Getting involved with your local self-advocacy groups or contacting national organizations like SABE or SARTAC is a great place to start. Becca? Oh, you're muted again.
I hate that.
There you
It's
go.
Friday, you guys. I am terrible on a Friday.
No, you're fine.
It's been many meetings and muting and unmuting by now. So I just want to answer this question a little bit differently than I think anybody else is thinking about it, because that word value really triggers something for me that I think is important to talk about, which makes me want to say, why would you be reducing anybody to anything? Right? Like if you are involved in working with somebody in any capacity, you've decided that they inherently have value for you to work with them. Right. And so what you're deciding to do is really say, you know, this human being has value for all of the things that they are, whether it's their lived experience that's useful right now or some other skills that they have, or both. Right. But I think it's important to understand that value is not something that we toss around when we mean, do they have value in my study? Do they have value to my career, right? But we talk a lot about in the disability community that value is just inherent, right? Value is something that we all have, period, right? So I think that's really important because we shouldn't be reducing anybody to just one component of who they are. I think that's a really big mistake.
Sarah, are there other questions that you would like to read out loud?
Yeah, so I have one. I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat too as well. So this one is, what recommendations do you have for student researchers and postdocs who are neurotypical but want to start building community academic partnerships with autistic people? We often have less funding and less knowledge of the community organizations and areas we move to for our positions, but many of us want to start learning CBPR and do this work correctly.
Can I take a stab at that question, being a postdoc in exactly that boat right now? So I'm an autistic researcher who sought funding from the ARP from UCLA Scholars Program, and their Scholars Program mechanism is exactly for this, for a new up-and-coming researcher who want to do work in autism, but use a CBPR model in their work and has never done it before. And so I'm learning this process right now. So if you're interested, you can look up the ARP Scholars Program, and I could put the link in the chat if you're interested. And there's other examples that I'll put into the chat. But now I'm turning this over to the panelists. Does anyone want to take a stab at this question? Becca?
If I'm really honest, come find us. I mean, we're not a community that really, you know, is hiding ourselves anywhere. And we're really happy to educate people about our community. And so I think, you know, I want to say, if you're interested in it, be curious, like go down all of the rabbit holes that you can go down, start finding where our community exists and start attending our community events, right? It's a really great way to stay involved and up to date with what's going on in our community and sort of understand perhaps, you know, the areas in which we would appreciate having research done. I think it's important that kind of you don't ask to involve, you know, to ask to utilize our community's information, like our data, without at least spending some time getting to know us and kind of what we're about. And so I really encourage young researchers to really search out our community and come learn how to be an ally in general, right? Like forget the research, learn how to be an ally as a human being for us. And I think that will innately help you to work with our community as a researcher.
Agreed. Dina, and also I want to point out to our audience that there's a conversation happening with Dina and Ava about gift cards. So just don't want to raise that. But Dina.
Yeah, well, when we're done chatting about it, yeah, okay. So first of all, let me clarify that there are issues with even giving a gift card if it can be converted to food, because many people on SSI who have an income gap limit of $2,000 a month, those people probably also have access to, say, food stamps. So, you know, it can be even risky giving an Amazon or a Visa gift card because they can be converted to cash. So I just wanted to clarify that. I did also want to say amount matters a lot. Again, keeping in mind that someone on SSI is going to earn around $700 to $800 a month. So if the gift card doesn't exceed that $2,000 limit for the month, it might be all right. And many people who are dual enrollment people. So I'm one of those people. I get SSDI because I worked enough, but because my income is so low, SSI covers my Medicaid rather covers my premium for Medicare. So that makes it so I have to function under that $2,000 limit as well, even though I'm on Medicare and not Medicaid. So I wanted to clear that up. What I wanted to speak to was about how to find us. You know, I'm at a very small private school in New York because I couldn't pass the GRE anymore. I'm just too old. My brain doesn't work that way. I didn't do well on standardized tests the first time. And back then they required the GRE for almost every program in the nation. So as a result of that, I'm the only autism researcher in my department, the only one. And if I hadn't spent years prior to getting here networking in the community, I would not have the huge pool of peers that I can reach out to now for support. And I definitely wouldn't have known how to find other people, whether we're talking about finding autistic people or people who are kind about mentoring or supporting young researchers. So pick a conference that has a huge representation of people with shared research interests. Print out business cards, go to Vistaprint, print out something with your photo on it, and go to the conference, sit in the front row. And when someone is presenting on a topic you have questions about or you'd like to network with them, hit them up as soon as they step off that podium, give them your business card, write your question on the back of the card if you're too shy to ask it in public. But network, be aggressive. Don't be anxious about approaching people. Those of us who've been published and we have a lot of stuff out there, we expect people to just find us. As Stephen Shore calls them affectionately, pop-ups, you know, people that just stop you in the middle of the conference and say, oh, I've been following your work and I'd like to know more. Just, you know, get yourself out there, whether it's the ABCT conference that's coming up, or it's the AUCD conference, or it's INSAR when it's domestic. Like, pick a conference, save your pennies, and maximize your opportunity there. And all of those events are being flooded now with autistic co-creators and autistic researchers. You can find us there.
Thank you, Dina. And Sandy.
Yeah, just building on what Becca was saying about the young, the new earlier investigators, postdocs, and graduate students. Yeah, I totally agree that they should just get involved in the community, right? And when you're dealing with racial ethnic minority communities, you can physically go to places and actually attend events, as Becca said, you know, actually volunteer for things. I mean, what a great time I know you feel like you don't have time for anything, but just wait till you get, you know, just wait till later. You're really not gonna have time. So now is your time to get out there and actually become part of those communities and build those relationships.
Sarah, would you like to read another question from our audience?
Yes, but Nelsinia, do you want to respond first?
I thought about coming to us in person, if possible. I think that many of our cultures like that person to person, coming to where we're at, to our offices, and that will be good, like sharing and understand, you know, like sharing time, whatever it is, whether it's in the city, not being afraid of that or anything like that, and follow some of the cultural forms. For us, I think it will be important to have like a lunch or something, right, that reflects our culture too. So I think it's in a way respectful, but being humble and kind of follow some cultural norms that are common for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelsinia. Donnie?
I want to answer a couple questions back. It is frustrating to me how non-disabled researchers treat disabled people when we are co-researchers. Way too often, I get asked to present on my life story, or worse, medical history, because people see that I'm disabled and toss the fact that I have academic and policy expertise out the window. And beyond just me, a lot of the time, when non-disabled researchers consult with self-advocates, they will listen to our stories and go, "Oh, poor pitiful you, it must be so hard to live your life." But when we tell them what kinds of research or policies would improve our lives, they tune that out. Because we are not allowed to have expertise beyond our own experiences, and we are not allowed to have insight into what would improve our lives. We are not allowed to talk about systemic failures and failures of non-disabled people to support us and empower us to live our lives. We are not allowed to talk about ableism and the extent of ableist violence. We are not allowed to be angry about how we have been hurt for being disabled. We are expected, if we speak at all, to be pitiful sob stories and self-narrating zoo exhibits that do not challenge typical narratives on disability. If you want to include autistic people and other people with disabilities as co-researchers, you have to listen to us and actually act on what we tell you. It is not enough to placate us with empty promises. Because we are not ignorant and we understand. We know when you are not taking us seriously and we are sick of it.
Thank you so much, Donnie, for sharing that. As we see so many calls and statements put out about anti-racism or anti-sexism and inclusivity, it has to include anti-ableism in these messages. It is so pervasive everywhere, and it's absolutely pervasive in the research space, in the academic space, and accept it. It's the norm, and it shouldn't be. Kara, did you want to read out another question from the audience?
I think we have time for one more if you all are okay with it. We have a question from the audience member that says, what strategies have you seen as most effective for normalizing any oops moments to ensure that they support and do not stifle ongoing collaboration? Thinking this means in the collaboration within the team.
Becca? You got to unmute.
For me, it's definitely accountability. I want to say I want people to be accountable, right? Like, it's okay to make mistakes. I certainly, as a disabled person, make them all the time, right? But I'm certainly not going to take my mistakes and make someone else take the blame for them, right? So take ownership of your mistakes when you make them, be accountable for them, and actively, make the effort to not make it again. I think we have all learned this lesson a lot more recently, as we've all sort of normalized the use of pronouns, right? And we've all definitely stepped in it a few times in this process. And that's really similar, right? And what we want to do is not walk away like we didn't do something, right? It's like when you trip and fall and everyone saw you, you got to admit you tripped and fell, right? So take accountability and make sure that, you make efforts to not do it in the future.
Thank you, Becca. Dina?
I just wanted to share something I wasn't planning on sharing, but I'm going to. I've had 2 experiences in the last 6 months where something happening for someone else in the room became a visceral attack at me. Name calling, suggestions of racism, just, somebody was bringing their personal baggage to the room, not having ever known me or not really knowing me well enough to know that those would never be things I would do. And I was very disappointed that the PI, the people who are relatively in charge, did nothing to address this during or after the meeting. So when we're talking about accountability, like, there has to be a grown-up in the room that can say, no, we don't do this. you know. In one case, it was the person in the room who's responsible for making sure nobody does this. But, you know, it's just creating a safe space where people's boundaries are respected, where someone will be asked a clarifying question instead of being attacked. I can just tell you, I pulled out of both of those projects after those experiences, not because it happened, because I know in one case it was a disability related thing. In the other case, it was probably also disability related. I pulled out because there was no accountability. Because like Becca says, people are going to make mistakes. People are going to say things that in retrospect they regret, but you have to be responsible for your actions and your behaviors, and at least open up a dialogue with someone. And so, I'm a grown woman now. I have big girl panties that are bigger than I want them to be. And, I just simply said, you know what, my time is valuable and I don't want to be a part of a space where I don't feel safe. But, some of us are more vulnerable to those kinds of attacks. I know I was when I was younger. Or, if I was closer to, or, diagnosis or something like that, any of those factors could make someone more vulnerable to being victimized that way. And so we need to support one another to be able to, make decisions like pulling out or stepping away or approaching the person who victimized and saying, listen, I think you need to address this, instead of just pretending it never happened. So, Becca, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to share that.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience, Dina, and also very important for us to consider if we're leading these meetings with our advisors. I think we're at time, but to end, I want to thank our panelists for being here today, taking the time out to share your perspectives, your experiences, your expertise. We value everything that you've said, and I think we learned a lot. And I hope that we take what we learned today and actually implement what our panelists has shared with us today, because I think it's very important and valuable. I'm going to turn this over to Kara now to kind of lead us up to the next activity.